We're at Tswalu Kalahari Reserve. Tswalu means new beginnings, and that makes it a very appropriate site in the middle of the African desert to discuss an issue of utmost importance to Africa and indeed to the international community. How to fix fragile states, how to make peacekeeping more effective, how to ensure that we really do build peace through building economies in those states. Soldiers, unrest, war, peacekeepers. Pictures we're used to seeing on our television screens. But for many living in these war-torn countries, those are the pictures they see when they open their eyes, when they walk out of their homes, and when they go to bed at night. Countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, Congo, Sierra Leone and Somalia are but a few that have experienced immense strife and hardship. In human terms, thousands of people killed, maimed, and left with nothing. While some of these countries still have civil strife, others have achieved a level of peace and stability which could enable them to rebuild countries and rebuild nations. But often they need help, the kind of help that is offered by foreign military forces, civilian personnel, and NGOs. But how do you rebuild a society that has been shattered by war? How do you ensure that peaceful situations remain stable? And how do you go from stability to prosperity? The Brenthurst Foundation and its international partners recently hosted a dialogue on the future of stability operations at the picturesque Tswalu Game Reserve in the Kalahari. This dialogue included participants from around the world who have had recent experiences of stabilization operations in countries like Afghanistan and Somalia. General David Richards is the Chief of the UK Defence Staff, the professional head of the British Armed Forces. He has commanded in East Timor and Sierra Leone, where his decisive actions played a large part in defeating the rebels and bringing the country's ruinous civil war to an end. He was also overall commander of NATO forces in Afghanistan in 2006. Welcome, General Richards, to the Tswalu Dialogue on the Future of Stability Operations. You've had considerable experience in stability operations from places like Sierra Leone and Afghanistan. What are the 2 or 3 biggest lessons you've learnt over the course of those experiences?
Gosh, only 2 or 3. I've learned a lot. And it's great to be here, by the way, and thank you for bringing us all together to discuss it. But one lesson is you can identify lots of problems, lots of ingredients. Can you turn that into good effect? And I think we need to look at ways of how you apply lessons in terms of implementation, because the international community's abiding failure has been one of a failure to implement some excellent ideas. And there's a risk that we reinvent the wheel every year at conferences like this. The test of this one is that we all leave here clear what must be done and go out and get our separate nations to start doing it. But I mean, more specifically, I mean, I'm an ancient soldier now, and if you don't get the command and control arrangements right, then your chances of delivering, however good the ideas are, however good the troops are reduced considerably. And it's not only military, it's the linkage between the civilian and the military, and there are mechanisms that one can use in order to improve that critical area of vulnerability. I think from a military perspective, key is having enough resources to do the job you're asked to do. People talk about boots on the ground. That's a vital dimension, but it's more than just that. It's helicopters, it's logistics support, it's properly trained people, and all that sort of thing. And the other thing, I suppose, of many is keeping providing a basic system of justice whereby the people who you're going to help have some means of dispute resolution that is timely and effective. And I think if you get that in place early, while you're doing all the other things, then people probably will give you the benefit of the doubt and that little bit more time to achieve your shared objectives. Stability and peace and ultimately prosperity are all about politics at the end of the day, and getting the politics right. What can the military do to play a part in getting the political environment
more conducive to stability and to getting the economy working?
Well, I'm not of the school of thought, as you know, that the military must stay rigidly in their military lane. The fact is, in a lot of the areas in which we're operating, the military traditionally, historically, count for more than, quite rightly, they need to count in places like America or Great Britain, for example. So the military will have a catalytic role in order to persuade, cajole, incentivize people who are uncertain, because they've never studied these problems in the way we rightly devote a lot of effort to, as to how they can bring the military and the political and non-security lines of operation together. It's in many respects our biggest role, that of military commanders, is to influence political actors, civil servants, diplomats, to do the sorts of things that we, in due humility, we think is necessary.
Often these operations are led by the military. In Afghanistan, essentially the military are in control of areas, and this is the case in many operations in Africa too. Shouldn't it be the other way around, that these are operations really run by civilians which the military support?
Well, in theory, they are actually run by civilians primarily. I mean, in Afghanistan, President Karzai is the sovereign head of state, and he is directing that operation. Now, clearly, it's not as neat as that. There's a divide somewhere, and one side of that naturally lies to people like me and General Petraeus today in Afghanistan. I think it's a matter of teamwork. I don't think you can neatly suggest that that's your area and that's my area. There's a big common area, and depending how bad the situation, the more influence that the military probably have.
Do you think we've learned to spend aid better in these environments?
I think it's better, but it's not yet good enough. And there's too much dependence on aid. There's not enough concentration on jobs and the creation of a sounder economy, too much on soft issues, where they're very important. Actually, if you think about it, the thing that matters most to anybody in any community is security. If you can't walk down a road without being shot at or blown up, or you're subject to intimidation every night because there's a knock on the door, that's intolerable for anybody in any part of the world. But the next thing is a job, economic security. And I think more and more effort needs to be focused on ensuring a sounder economy, which basically means the creation of jobs.
Now, in those two experiences, you've had considerable operation experience, Sierra Leone and Afghanistan. Both of them were very difficult regions, remain difficult regions in many respects. How does one get the politics, the regional political dimension right?
Well, first of all, the most important thing is to recognise there will be a regional dimension. In Sierra Leone, it was Liberia in particular, but it's a much smaller problem, and the vast majority of the Sierra Leone population was, in a political sense, on side and wanted us to succeed. I'd say the RUF constituted, 2% of the population with their supporters, so it was much more straightforward. In Afghanistan, the key issue is probably the relationship between Afghanistan and countries such as Pakistan, and then their perspective on India, which I think is too little understood, Iran, the Stans, as they're colloquially known. I think each counterinsurgency, each stabilization operation is different, but in virtually all of them there will be a regional dynamic, which it is a duty of people like me to understand. It won't always be the same, but it'll be there, and you just have to learn about it and then devise objectively security policies, politics and security operations that allow you to mitigate the risks inherent in whatever situation it is.
Now, Afghanistan was an operation with 40 nations plus, many thousands of troops, a very complex environment domestically and regionally, but a complex military operation. As commander, how difficult was it to knit that all together?
Well, first of all, you have to accept that you're not going to command in the traditional way. You are more an influencer and a coordinator. Now, in certain specific military areas, it's not really a problem because the military tend to be all of the same cloth, even if we're coming from different backgrounds nationally with different political pressures. But the higher up the issue becomes, the more difficult it is. And as I said a minute ago, it is key to understanding one's position as a military commander to understand that you are there to influence others and then to coordinate the outcome efficiently, rather than to think you're going to have some great sovereignty or even autonomy in deciding what happens when.
Finally, how important is it getting your message across?
I think one of our abiding failures has been that of strategic communications. We know, particularly in the era of digital communications, that it's absolutely vital. Our opponents tend to use it very adroitly. I think we've got some way to go in terms of understanding how to get that vital message across, playing on the the vast majority of these operations, the support of the vast majority of the people in whichever country we're in. But the power of communications means that that 2, 5, 10% maybe that are actually in opposition to the vast majority have often a monopoly of communications means because we're not filling the space. And if you don't fill it, they will, and they tend to be rather good at it.
Dr. Ayanda Nsaluba, then South Africa's Director General for the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, says that change in a country has to be driven internally, but it also has to be backed up with sufficient logistical support. Dr. Ayanda Nsaluba, you are one of the co-chairs of this event at Tswalu on the future of stability operations. South Africa, of course, has had a tremendous role in peacekeeping operations in the African continent, but more especially we've had, in a sense, perhaps the most notable experience of conflict resolution within our own borders in 1994. Was our success just down to superb leadership by Mr. Mandela, or were there other ingredients?
Well, I mean, I think there is no question about it that President Mandela did play a very key role. Because I think one of the very important things is when you're faced with moments of crisis, you need credible leadership, you need a decisive leadership, but also more importantly, you need a leadership that can unite a nation behind a shared vision. So those are key